art is the path of the creator to his work. I was studying American literature at Columbia University, and I fully intended to be a professor of American literature. And around that time, I began to meet artists and got enthralled with what they were doing. And this was especially happening with me in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in that time, which was like a thriving underground art scene that Manhattan was not really paying attention to it. There was no money. The exhibitions were organized by artists themselves. And I befriended artists, and I went to studios, and I was really avid, but also undereducated. And artists suffered my intrusions, my passion, my mistakes, and I learned so much from artists themselves, and works in process, how artists are really thinking and acting and dreaming and exploring in the studio. And by the way, that remains still my fundamental education. And I began to write about the art that was around me right there in Brooklyn. And that led then to writing for Art News and writing for Art in America and things like that. And of course, I knew something about Ralph Waldo Emerson and transcendentalism, but it's his essay, The Poet, from 1844, that I just want to give you as a little sustenance from America. This, for me, is the first great radical statement about art making produced in America after a European settlement. And among other things, I'll just give you a couple of quotes. "For we are not hands and barrows, nor even porters of the fire and torch bearers, but children of the fire, made of it." The thing about Emerson is that art is a complete expression of the total person. It's not just the object that is made. It has to do with consciousness. It has to do with living one's art comprehensively. And there's a great moment in that essay, you almost like pass it over. It happens so quickly, in which Emerson all of a sudden writes, "Art is the path of the creator to his work." And it's like, wait, what? Wait a minute. I thought art was the sculpture or the painting. And way back in the 1840s, Emerson's writing, no, art is the path of the creator to his work. The artist's comprehensive way of living, dreaming, thinking, breathing, exploring consciousness and actual things that are made. And that's a great thing for students to entertain this idea right now, how to really inhabit one's work and one's vision and one's developing consciousness, rather than just adding another artwork. This is Tavares Strahan from the Bahamas. I was invited to be visiting professor teaching this intense seminar for sculptors and also grads, for MFA students. It was like a very select thing. And my first day there, Tavares Strahan comes up to me very quiet, and he says, I want to be in your seminar. And I was like, that's great, but it's like a grad seminar. I said, once I found out he's a junior, I was like, yeah, that's great, it's a grad seminar. But anyway, show me what you do. And so I really expected he's in junior in glass. I thought he was going to show me, like, glass works that he made, vessels, cups, this kind of stuff. Instead, he took me into this room, like this. Okay, so it's like this clear and black pedestal, and he didn't say a single thing. And then all of a sudden, I heard this loud crashing, resounding booming coming from the loudspeakers, and he didn't say anything. And I was like, what is this? And he didn't say. He offered no explanation, and it took me quite a while to figure out. It was a single black ant walking on that black pedestal. And he had worked with engineers at Brown University to rig up this system in which you can make a miracle happens. You hear the sound of one ant walking, and it's loud, and it's a black ant, and it's in an alien place. and he's well aware of the alien environment. He's well aware of the poetics, the visual poetics of his work. He's well aware that he was a black guy from the Bahamas in the frozen north of the United States in Providence, Rhode Island. So in a certain way, this black ant becomes almost like a surrogate and ambassador for him. The other work he showed me was just this wall also making this sound, which was his actual heartbeat. He had rigged it up so as we're hearing and looking at the wall, it's registering his heart. I realized this guy is special. He's important. He's really going to go in his own meter-making argument way to bring Emerson back, and that's what he did. Even at this time, the next year, taking no credit. He's an expert glassmaker now, right? Once again, you remember what I said about Emerson, how far an artist is willing to go. I was a visiting critic at Yale, and Tavares, of course I will visit Tavares, and I was like, so Tavares, what are you working on? He's like, I want to go to the North Pole and get a huge chunk of ice and ship it to the Bahamas. I was like, okay, that sounds great. How are you going to do that, and he did it while still a student at Yale. And here's what it looked like. The biggest ice cube ever from a river in northern Alaska, which I love this, FedExed to the Bahamas. FedEx, and he had a friend of his whose father was some big wig in FedEx who could help with this. So it's FedEx to the Bahamas. Alien ice from the white frozen north is shipped to the Bahamas. And where does he show it? Like at the big museum or anything like that? No, he shows it at his grade school. At his elementary school, he shows it in a specially designed freezer powered by the sun, powered by solar power. So ice from Alaska, frozen by the sun of the Bahamas. And this starts what will be many works by Strahan, which are going to, which are fusing and opposites and moving between near and far and hot and cold. The most important thing that's happening in the arts in my lifetime is not the internet, and it's not new technology, and it's not new ways of making art. But the single most important thing I would say is the rise of women in the arts, unprecedented rise of women in all of Western art history, Western history. This has never happened, and it's something of utmost, it's like a pivotal, epical change in which art and cultural production is now really increasingly open to women, and that will change really everything in the long run. And I think that that's something fundamental, something that I greatly pay attention to. This is Katharina Grosse from Germany. I met her when she was young, a little bit out of grad school in Germany. She was making pretty good paintings. Not whoppingly great, but good. Interesting use of color. And things begin to get a little more rambunctious. They begin to get a little more strange. And then comes the meter-making argument moment when she does the radical step of moving off the canvas altogether into the real space and moving away altogether from the idea of a permanent painting to something that's temporary. A work that just happened in that way and no other, and exists only for a limited duration and then is gone forever. Most of her really greatest works, Katharina Grosse, and she's now super acclaimed artist worldwide, most of her best works no longer exist. As a matter of course, they're all gone. And she exchanged her paintbrush for a spray gun. And the painting was made in that way and no other. She couldn't go back and change it. It's a record of her experience in a particular space at a particular time, a body, a record of her body, a record of her consciousness. This too is in Marfa, Texas, and this is her abstracted version of a spectacular West Texas sunset. Look how far she's moving now from the parameters or the tradition of a painting. Now, paintings that you're immersed in them. They take over the space. They work against the rectilinear dimensions of the space, swooping in at different angles, bringing colors together that clash and also inspire greatly. Once, not that long ago, I was talking with Katerina about all sorts of intense things, and then finally she just said to me, Gregory, you know what it's really about? And I was like, no, Katerina, please tell me. She said, it is anarchic sexuality. And I was like, oh, that sounds great, Katerina. It's right here. Here's anarchic color, sexuality in action on the outside, not the inside, where it should be, on the outside of a somewhat scary-looking building in Berlin. This one woman made her work, her color work, which seems to be rising like bedazzling steam up the side of the building. And of course, for all the beauty, for all the over-the-top beauty, it's also a raid on the stolid, solid heft and brunt of this gray and once again somewhat scary architecture. It's bringing in fake rocks, working in the whole space at Mass MoCA, and she had to work with engineers to be sure that she didn't destroy the building. This weighed so much. And this work also, the amazing thing was that emptiness was one of its primary ingredients, no matter how huge this work was. Look how artfully composed, with foam, with soil, with fake rocks, with real rocks, a mediated nature and nature per se blurring and combining, and the colors, of course, have such intensity, and there's such freedom operating here. There's such freedom that in which she, in how she moves, you know, from the strictures of a canvas or a rectangular or square painting to operating in the real space. And it looks like this, it looked like this, one of the great signature shows I've seen in quite some time. I think it's really important to be open to art on an international level. So that's something fundamental to me, something I greatly care about. Even though I'm a New York-based art writer, it's really important for me not to only pay attention to New York City, but to pay attention to the big world. For whatever reason, I'm like a mini expert in contemporary Icelandic art. Go figure. I've been there many times, and I love it, and it's endlessly inspirational for me. But I've some of the art that's most meaningful to me I've found elsewhere in the world, in many different places. So that's something of enormous importance to me. This is Ayşe Erkman, one of Turkey's most prominent artists. And here's the Emersonian, for me, work, the meter-making argument work. You can imagine, okay, it's a freight elevator, however, outfitted with a new kind of suit, a gleaming silver freight elevator that looks workaday, but also spectacular. And I was trying to like, okay, what is this? It's a sculpture. And I was like staring at it. It starts to leave. And it leaves, and it's gone. Forever, for the whole show, constantly but slowly shuttling between first and second floor, like an elevator that was not really sure where it should be, a nervous elevator that wanted to maybe be on the second floor, but like then it got a little scared and went back to the first floor all the time. and at the same time it's wearing this new shiny suit. This elevator that's been working for 100 years, because this show occurred in a shipping warehouse at the Bosporus, you know. So this elevator has been carrying heavy, heavy things for years and years and years, and Aisha Ekman comes along and gives it just a break, you know. It has a rest, and it also becomes a star for a brief time. One of the most ignoble parts of the whole space suddenly is wonderful and vivid and shiny and lovely. In Münster, Germany, Aisha Ekman had it in her mind to work with Münster's famous cathedral. She wanted to work with that cathedral, and she submitted a proposal to work with the clock that's there. And she got back her answer. Thanks a lot for this is at a show that's worth paying attention to, that happens every 10 years. It's called Sculpture Projects Münster, in which artworks are made all over the city, not in museums, like outside in different places in the city. This was 1997. So Aisha Ekman, who's from Turkey and lives part of the time in Germany, got back the answer from the church, like, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. What can you do? So she submitted another proposal, and she got back the answer, I'm no, sorry, this is not going to work. She's a stubborn woman, and she submitted a third proposal. It's not going to work. And even her curator, the very famous Kasper Koenig, told her, Aisha, the jig is up. It's not going to work. You need to find another place. However, she also found why it's not working. And it was two reasons. First, the Catholic cathedral did not want some kind of risky, unusual contemporary art there. And secondly, and even more important, by no means did the Catholic Church in Münster want such a work of art made by a woman from a Muslim country, by a Muslim woman in that church, okay? However, the jig was not up. So Aisha Ekman researched in German law how high above the highest point of the steeple does the church own? And at what point does the air become free space? And it actually is a certain number of meters. I don't remember. But at a certain point, the jurisdiction stops, according to German law. So she went to the Landesmuseum next to the cathedral. That's a famous museum. And actually, out into the storage facility of the Landesmuseum, where all sorts of 16th and 15th century stone sculptures were stored, some of them religious, some of them secular, and she fitted them under a helicopter. And they went flying through the air. Angels flew above Münster, and they flew, and they circled in the free air the steeple of the church 3 times, and at one point the service was interrupted, and the priest declared that this woman is evil. And I was there for the first time this happened, and believe me, evilness was not the thing. This became a celebration. Kids were running through the streets. Grown-ups were throwing their hats. A miracle had happened in Münster. And there was such a joyous spirit going on, and no one was being mocked. And this humorous, lovely miracle of flying stone statues above Münster, a meter-making argument to the extreme, in Emerson's terms, an artist really pushing her aesthetic and her ideas really very far. One has the freedom and perhaps even the responsibility, in Emerson's terms, to find one's own forms, no matter how unorthodox, no matter how strange or not, but to find your own way of expression. This is Joan Jonas, one of the most visionary artists, the most pioneering artists of the time, will finally be getting her big due on the world stage. She's a pioneer of performance art and video art, for example, with this great work, Vertical Roll, from 1972, in which she dresses up in this garish female costume, but dressed up like that, she's always climbing into the picture, but it's never fully revealed. And this work is an absolute master work of the medium and has long been understood to be that as well. This is her alter ego, Organic Honey, from the same time, which she's called an erotic electronic sorceress, working with masks, with costumes, with dance, with movement, with video screens at the same time. Once again, a pioneer of installation art at this point. Emerson was writing about the poet, but he equally could have been referring to any other art form: sculpture, painting, photography. All of the artists that I show tonight are making radical shifts and variations and explorations in terms of what an artwork actually is. By no means do sculptures have to be stationary, nor do they have to be permanent. In fact, they can last for 2 seconds. A great sculpture can last for 2 seconds. It's really important for artists to know how to make works that are not only good, but that matter, that humanly matter. Aisha Erkman often works not with autonomous artworks, but with what's already there, figuring out a way to alter and change the whole context where you are. She decided she wanted to work with water in Venice, with the most ubiquitous substance of Venice, representing Turkey in the Venice Biennale. So she made this installation, beautiful, color coordinated, color coded, fantastic exhibition that functioned as a water purifying system. It brought the foul water of Venice into the sculpture from out there, purified it, made it drinkable. I know this because I actually drank it. But she wanted to serve this water to everybody, but the city would not allow it. They just violated too many rules. It was totally pure. And that's Aisha Erkman, very happy with her water purifying sculpture. So her second, what she called Plan B, rather than the drinking of the water, was the pure water was then just released secretly through a pipe that you couldn't see out into Venice, a little gift of goodness to the surrounding city. This is Tavares Stratton's first show in New York at Pierogi Gallery, and those bottles that you can see on the left are really drinkable. And the label on the bottle says, product of Tavares Stratton, bottled at the source. And what it is his purified urine. Completely drinkable. And all the glass there in this crazy laboratory was made by him. Then I talked with Tavares again, and I said, okay, Tavares, now what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to go to Star City in Russia and learn to be a cosmonaut because I want one of my upcoming works to occur in outer space. I was like, okay. And he did it. Like, again, somehow he was able to talk his way into Star City, which is like the top cosmonaut training program in Russia. And what he was really interested in is not just outer space, but the arduous work that goes into being a cosmonaut and involving deep underwater things, loss of balance, body placed in extremes, in a way that completely alters your consciousness. That's what he was so interested in. At the same time, he invented his own company, BASIC, Bahama Air and Space Exploration Center. Doesn't exist in the Bahamas. You know, all the big countries have those kind of institutions, but not little Bahamas. So this is not the CEO, like a top scientist of BASIC launching a rocket made out of glass. A rocket made out of glass, quite literally made from the Bahamas, from sand there. So the rocket itself was the Bahamas. And the fuel for the rocket was made from sugar that was grown there. So the energy of the Bahamas is launching this aspirational rocket toward the heavens. Walt Whitman sent the most radical poems that had ever been written, and still, in my opinion, have ever been written in America. The 1855 version of Leaves of Grass. Walt Whitman was unknown. Emerson was the most famous man of letters of that time, and he just got this sprawling, sensual, erotic, questing, earthy book, and he just understood that this is great, and he wrote back. He wrote Whitman the famous letter, "I greet you at the beginning of a great career." He understood. So I would like to think that Emerson, who was open to things and endlessly experimental, would certainly be open to contemporary visionaries, of which there are many.